On this episode of China Unscripted, Taiwan activates missile systems against China. Biden caught in another China gaffe. And Backstreet's back. All right. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
And we just have some breaking news, at least as far as on Friday when we began recording this, but Taiwan, when Chinese aircraft entered their airspace, Taiwan deployed the missile defense systems to monitor the situation. Look, sometimes it's not easy to get like a really grabby headline in these kind of things.
So yeah, the headline made it sound like, ooh, they deployed missiles.
Yeah. Oh man, did they shoot a Chinese jet out of the plane? Are we getting this World War III finally underway?
I'm not sure that's something to be excited about.
World War III, you heard it first on China Unscripted. Don't fact check that. There's no time all the fear.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if I've learned anything over the last few years, it's that headlines don't need to be accurate.
That's sadly very true. Very true.
They just need to be interesting. And also, I'm sorry if you're hearing all the train.
Yeah. What's that saying? If it clicks, it sticks. I'm not good at this.
If it bleeds, it leads. If it clicks, it sticks.
If it sticks, shouldn't it be?
If it sticks, it clicks.
Like you want them to click.
Anyways, now that we've lost our entire audience, here's what happened in Taiwan. Just another instance of China sending its harassing them with their fighter jets. And I guess this was a slight escalation on Taiwan's part because in addition to scrambling their fighters and monitoring the situation, there were also missile defense systems deployed
to monitor the situation. So it's just a constant this is actually the strategy the Chinese Communist Party is using. Every time it's easy for them with a much larger military to be able to scramble some jets. Taiwan having to scramble its entire defense system to, just be sure that gradually wears down the machinery, the pilots. It's a real drain on Taiwan's military.
Right, but they have to do it because if they don't, then the CCP will see that Taiwan is not taking its defense seriously, and then they'll just keep pushing the line, pushing the line.
Well, it actually reminds me of something that happened in a Jin Yong novel, a famous wuxia writer.
Good, we're all familiar with that, so go on.
Yeah, well, so there's this one point where like the hero Yang Guo, in the old days, like all these kung fu masters had like secret projectile weapons that they would sometimes throw.
There's like needles and stuff like that.
Needles and stuff or like throwing stars. And he's fighting a more powerful opponent, and he starts yelling projectiles, and then the guy like defends himself, but there's no projectiles.
Oh,
and he keeps doing this, and then eventually he gets like fed up with it, and then that time is when he throws a projectile.
Okay.
And that relates to Taiwan. If the time when Taiwan's like, all right, fine, we won't projectile.
Well, I think that's why they're not doing that.
Exactly.
Because Taiwan has read all the Jin Yong novels.
Didn't he, Louis Cha, Jin Yong, didn't he live in Taiwan towards the end of his life?
You ask us like we know anything about Jin Yong.
You uncultured swine.
I did buy a Jin Yong novel in Taiwan, but then I haven't read it yet.
It was so good. The eagle shooting heroes or condor?
Condor heroes.
That's one of the best. The sequel is the one where the guy does the projectile thing.
Ah, okay.
I highly recommend Jin Yong. It's fantastic. There's this one guy in the book you read. He's such a powerful martial artist. He's able to fight people with his flute. Not by like hitting people with the flute, but he's just cultivated his inner chi so well. He can play the flute and make you go insane.
Whoa. Okay. First of all, I didn't realize how big a fan you were of wuxia novels.
Well, just Jin Yong. I haven't really read any of the other big people.
But now I'm like, maybe what we should do is start a channel where we just like watch wuxia TV series together.
Welcome to Novels Unread.
Yeah.
Or it's more like Welcome to Matt and Shelley Uncultured. Starring Chris Chappell.
There we go. No, I prefer our gamer channel where we play different games and talk about politics. That might be more interesting than this show at this point.
Look, it's been a long week.
It's been a long decade.
Wow, you went really far.
It did.
Yeah.
I'm old. It's like the scene in Zardoz where, okay.
What is Zardoz? Wait.
No, go on. What's Zardoz, Chris?
Zardoz.
I mean, for the audience, obviously.
Yeah, video editor, pull up a picture of Sean Connery.
Oh, is this the one where
where he's wearing
like a leotard?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I remember you referenced that photo before in an episode, and I was kind of disturbed by that, but I didn't know what the movie was.
Yeah. Anyways, at the end, there's like a scene where like he and his wife are just sitting, staring at the camera, and they rapidly age and turn into skeletons.
Wow. Okay.
So that's what I was thinking of with this decade.
Okay, that makes sense.
You're like the.
Yeah. So Taiwan, that poor Taiwan. They got a new defense minister, though, U.S. trained.
Yes.
So this is something we're also waiting for, where the Biden administration has not gotten to very many specific things as far as China goes. There's actually a lot he said this past week that we'll probably discuss later in the episode. But he hasn't done much specifically about Taiwan. I think Blinken has like reaffirmed that, Taiwan is an important ally.
He wouldn't have said ally, right?
Probably forget the language.
I don't think they would have said partner. But like there was something that this is maybe like a week or two ago where they're trying to scramble jets again, and then the Biden administration responded, and then with a like ship going through the Taiwan Strait, right? Didn't we do a?
Oh yeah, I believe it was the USS Nimitz and the Roosevelt. I think
McCain.
No, the McCain was something else in the South China Sea. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so that was encouraging. The Biden administration up till now, we're about a month into it. There's been 2 freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea. So it's good that that's still carrying on.
They did invite the unofficial Taiwanese ambassador to the U.S. to the inauguration.
Yes, that's right. Which I think that was the first time that's happened since the 70s.
Yes. The 70s.
Yeah. So it'll be nice to see the Biden administration do like more specific policy things. Like, will they keep up the weapons sale that the Trump administration was doing? Will there be other high-level diplomatic visits?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Definitely. Well, I guess we
economic stuff too. Like,
yeah,
Taiwan and the U.S. There's been barriers for years as to getting some kind of like economic trade agreement between the two, largely about Taiwan not wanting to import certain U.S. meat because I can't remember if it's called racine or something. It's like
because it didn't meet their standards.
Yes,
and that's why you watch China Unscripted.
That is why. It's because they didn't meet their standards. But like the Taiwanese standards for how much of this can be in meat is stricter than the U.S. But then they relaxed it last year so that there could be more U.S. meat imports into Taiwan. And so this was seen as like the beginning of going towards a possible trade agreement between Taiwan and the U.S.
Unfortunately, we're recording this at lunchtime. And so I'm hungry, and now I'm remembering that Taiwanese beef hot pot we had in Tainan.
Oh my gosh.
And that was incredible. So and then the local media wrote a story about us eating hot pot there.
Yes.
I
think it was more than one local media.
Really?
Yeah. I think there was some print and like TV coverage.
Strange things have happened to us in the course of doing this show. Weird media attention like that. I'm reminded of when we went viral for Harry Potter.
That has nothing to do with the show, though.
That was all you, Chris.
Well, it was Shelley and my interaction with that. That was, look that up if you don't know what I'm talking about. You'll have a good laugh. But so that's, economic is a really big way the U.S. and Taiwan can interact more. Because as we've all really discovered, made in China things, not good.
And you'd be surprised at some of the things that are made in Taiwan that you don't really think about.
Yeah, well, they have an emerging tech industry.
No, it's not. It's a pretty, like, the best semiconductors in the world are made in Taiwan, which the Chinese Communist Party has tried multiple times to steal that technology.
Sure.
But also things like, apparently a lot of high-end exercise equipment is made in Taiwan.
Really?
Bicycles, like Peloton.
Pelotons are made in Taiwan.
Hey,
Yeah.
that's a reason to buy a Peloton, though I wonder if they'll sponsor us.
I don't think they need anyone to sponsor them.
I think they were like,
it's been a great year for Peloton.
Yeah, basically.
Just get a kettlebell, a made in the USA kettlebell.
You could maybe get a made in the USA kettlebell company to sponsor you.
If you're watching a company that makes kettlebells in the US, you know what to do.
Yeah, so there are like a lot of things made in Taiwan that you wouldn't necessarily think of. Yeah.
So it's open for fruitful possibility.
Well, I think also when we were in Taiwan only a year ago.
Right before everything.
Yeah. So, a lot of the people we were talking to when we were asking, in what ways could the U.S. support Taiwan? Like, what do you want the U.S. government to do? Most of them were actually saying, like, we need more economic support. That was one of the things that Guan Zhang, the Taiwan's Joe Rogan guy, was talking about, which was the one reason that like some of the older Taiwanese people are more like friendly to the Chinese, the PRC, is because they think, well, like, we need like the economic support, right? Like,
yep.
That was the whole thing from the presidential thing election last year, which was about like, oh, well, do we want economic ties with China, or do we, that kind of thing. So having the U.S. as an economic partner would go a long way towards getting more Taiwanese people on board with kind of opposing the CCP. Yeah.
And that was actually a big characteristic of the Trump administration's approach to containing the Chinese Communist Party, establishing economic ties with other countries.
Like which ones?
Oh, well, like developing like the clean 5G network.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Infrastructure, specific things to counter the Belt and Road Initiative, the
$60 billion Africa investment.
It was actually not just Africa, which is why it wasn't really that much money, since I think it was like all
developing countries.
Yeah. Whereas like China did, I think, $60 billion just in Africa.
There was an interesting Wall Street Journal opinion article that came out this past week about how the U.S. should build their own Belt and Road system, but it kind of didn't really understand what the Chinese Communist Party's Belt and Road system was. Like, it was kind of like, well, we should do, China's getting a lot of success doing like a lot of this infrastructure investment around the world. The U.S. needs to do the same.
Well, it's like the Marshall Plan.
Yeah, basically, it was treating the Belt and Road like it was the Marshall Plan, but that's not what the Belt and Road is.
It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the Communist Party's intention behind the Belt and Road.
What's the Marshall Plan for the audience that doesn't, if somebody watching doesn't know?
Well, so after World War II, Europe was, of course, in ruins, and the U.S. was concerned that the Soviets were going to have a lot of influence in Europe in terms of helping build infrastructure. And so one of the things the U.S. did, partly to help Europe, but also to counter the Soviets, was to invest a large amount of money and personnel into actually going into Europe, mostly Western Europe, to build infrastructure, help them rebuild all the stuff that was destroyed. And so it was a huge economic boost for Europe, and it solidified our alliances there. Of course, this is also like at the beginning of the Cold War, right? So you have to keep in mind like geopolitical tensions were a big part of it. And that's essentially what's happening now, right? Which is the Chinese Communist Party, or the new equivalent of the Soviet Union, right? So it's not just that the U.S., it would be nice if we helped developing countries. It's that it would be nice if we did that, and also if we don't do it, the Chinese Communist Party is going to do it.
Well, we had a really good example of that on an episode this week about the 17+1. And we're going to have an episode about China's ties to Europe in the near future. But just to tie on to that point, was it Lithuania? Nuclear reactors?
No, Romania.
Romania had an agreement with the Chinese Communist Party to build nuclear reactors as part of the Belt and Road. But, and this is an example of what I was saying about the Trump administration, the U.S. basically got in there and undercut the Chinese builders. And
well, no, it was kind of like there were already problems between the Chinese state-run company that was supposed to be building these nuclear reactors in Romania. So what the U.S. actually did was it did a lot of diplomatic outreach to these Eastern European countries, and including Romania. Like in 2019, the president of Romania visited the Washington, D.C., They did like a nice photo op with him shaking hands with Trump in the White House. And it's like a lot of, attention for, no offense, Romania, right? Like it's a smaller European country that probably most of Americans would not know where it was on a map. And
it's in Italy, right?
Oh, yes, it's Romania. It's
when you're having too much fun in Rome, you're having Romania.
Okay, Chris's was way better. I'm sorry, Matt.
But he was the fruitful field ripe for growing jokes.
That's right.
Okay, but yeah, this is how the magic happens.
So my waste jokes are actually the fertilizer for your beautiful jokes.
Exactly, your jokes are absolute well. Anyways, let's. Yeah, I'm telling you, when we make a gaming channel, it'll be much more entertaining.
So anyway, Romania, Eastern European country.
Well, so they released a joint statement after this state visit to the U.S. about how it was in general about cooperation and diplomacy in general between the two countries. But one of the things it talked about is like reaffirming Romania's nuclear energy security or something like that. And then eventually the same year, the Romanian government was replaced. Like there was a left-wing government that was more friendly towards China, and then they were voted out and replaced with a more right-leaning government that was less friendly towards China.
Mm-hmm.
And the prime minister then canceled the deal with the Chinese state-run nuclear company because he was just like, I don't think it's gonna work. It's not gonna work.
Mm-hmm.
I think he meant literally, if they build it, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, okay, maybe. But there were
And now Chris build off of that with something funnier.
The pressure's on.
It's clay.
Oh.
It'll crumble.
No, okay. Anyway, so then a US company stepped in and is now building the nuclear reactors in Romania.
And this is how we do it.
And now you made a point that the Wall Street Journal article, was it?
Oh, about the Belt and Road? Yes.
Yeah. So they were comparing the Belt and Road to the Marshall Project. Why is it not the same thing?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the Chinese Communist Party is using it to, well, from an economic side, what they're doing is they're exporting their excess capacity. Like, if you think about China's GDP and how it's grown for many decades, it's actually through building things in China, even if those things were unnecessary, because that adds to their GDP growth. And now there are all these state-run companies and extra employees that now that type of growth is slowing down in China, there's nothing for them to build. So they're sending them to, the Middle East and Africa and Southeast Asia and all these other places. So these huge state-run companies can make money.
If they come, they will build.
Yes. Or something.
And it's also a good opportunity to ship a bunch of single men overseas to work and have jobs, which could otherwise be a problem inside China where segments of the economy are slowing.
Yeah, so a lot of the projects are being built by Chinese workers, not local workers in these countries.
So that's the economic side of the Belt and Road.
Well, I mean,
from China's perspective.
And also another economic benefit for them is that they're being paid, basically Chinese state-run companies, banks are loaning the money for these projects to these countries that are then paying these Chinese state-run companies to build the projects. So they're going to get money and with interest from these countries that are going into debt to make these projects happen.
So in a nutshell, whereas the Marshall Project was about actually helping these European countries so they would become good allies with the U.S. instead of the Soviet Union, China's Belt and Road is more about benefiting the Communist Party and dealing with their own internal problems than actually helping.
I mean, there were geopolitical reasons for the U.S. to do the Marshall Project, too. It was
that's what I said about
I also don't think the Marshall Plan was so cut and dry like that because the U.S., so after World War II, because the U.S. did relatively little fighting compared to other countries. We didn't have fighting on our own soil except for Hawaii briefly, right? And so we came out of the war with a ton of gold, an economic boom. For us, it was also exporting capacity, right? So American companies could make money in Europe. So I don't think it's not that there's no self-interest economically in that. I mean, but like obviously America is always the good guys. So that's the economic side of it. The political side of the U.S. Marshall Plan was to counter what we considered the dangerous Soviet Union and their interests, right? And what the Chinese Communist Party is doing politically is a little bit different with the Belt and Road.
Well, I mean, they're basically trying to essentially create vassal states. And usually I'm like, okay, if you want to do historical comparisons to China in the past, like a lot of people want to do this, but they kind of discount what the Chinese Communist Party is when they do this. Mm-hmm. But this is one case where like historically China like had influence over other countries, not so much by colonizing the way it was done in the West, but through maybe trade or other types of like exchange. And then like these other countries would be in some ways protected by China or like within their sphere of influence, basically.
Sounds a little like the mafia, protection money.
Right. I mean, also there were periods where the Chinese emperor had the say over who became the king in a certain Asian country. Right. So like even that level was pretty like much under the sphere of influence of China. So, I mean, maybe it's a little bit like how the Commonwealth countries are under the control of the crown, but
like the Queen could just be like, I'm firing your prime minister, Australia.
Well, I mean, technically it could.
Yeah.
And there was a time in the 70s where the Queen's representative did actually essentially dissolve all of Australian Parliament. Mm-hmm. And then they had to like put it back together. I don't think, I mean, that's been 50 years since that happened, but like that's a thing that theoretically the Queen could do, or the Crown, which is sort of the entity that represents the God-appointed monarchy in Europe, could do, right?
Mandate of heaven.
Right. Like Canada's like, you know, Australia, these are like independent countries, but they're not really, right? Because
so we could get the Queen to replace Trudeau?
Well, yeah, because you know Trudeau and other prime ministers in Commonwealth countries, they don't have term limits.
Mm.
Well,
they serve what's called at the Queen's pleasure, which is to say they are allowed to serve, you know, only so long as the Queen deems them appropriate. Now, in practice,
they serve as long as their parties
as long as their party is in power, right? But it's kind of a reminder that like ultimately, you know, the Commonwealth countries are, you know, they're part of the crown. They're governments only so long as the British monarchy allows that to happen. Now, obviously, in practice, there's so many things that would make it politically very difficult for the Queen to like just completely overthrow everything.
Are you kidding? The Queen has an army of swans at her command.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say corgis.
Why corgis?
Because the Queen notoriously loves corgis and has a lot of corgis.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, you know, she's on the money, right? If you go to Australia, Canada, she's like the Queen is part. But the difference is like, you know, England historically basically conquered all these places, right? And they were all part of the crown. And then later they got independence through, or sort of quasi-independence through different, like these Commonwealth agreements, right? So then they became Commonwealth nations that ran like 99% independently. The difference with what China did historically was less of that initial conquering and more of that kind of sphere of influence. But
they did back everything up with a big, powerful military.
That is also true. But like the reason that, for example, there was a time when all of Asia used Chinese characters for communication, right? I mean, the Japanese characters are a derivative of that. Korea, up until the 20th century, used a spin-off of Chinese characters. Most of Southeast Asia did.
Vietnam.
Yeah, right. I mean,
until colonization.
Right. I mean, like, you know, when the French came to Vietnam, they left their own writing system, and also the bread that made Vietnamese sandwiches, which are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But the larger point is that it was the cultural
Matt is not
influence.
defending colonization.
I'm not defending it.
He just likes a sandwich.
I'm only defending
It's
sandwiches. So the Imperial China's cultural influence was powerful, and other countries wanted to be like China at the time. So what we're seeing now is less that other countries want to be like China in terms of cultural influence. It's that they want Chinese money or they want Chinese infrastructure. Some dictators find it to be like a safe partner.
That is another thing that a lot of the Belt and Road countries, especially in places like Africa, they're dictatorships.
Yeah.
So
That's a big part of the Belt and Road and Huawei,
Yeah.
safe cities.
And like the whole idea is that like oftentimes it will enrich the corrupt officials in these countries while actually kind of pillaging the countries of their natural resources, whether that's precious metals or, you know, like fish even. Remember when we talked to Nasser about Mauritania?
Yeah.
So this whole thing is like kind of enriching a few corrupt officials who are in charge of these authoritarian countries while kind of also enriching the Chinese Communist Party, and the local people are who suffer.
Well, this is sounding more like an episode of History Unearthed.
I was actually thinking that when Matt was starting to talk about the Marshall Plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the ideas that we've been discussing as like a spin-off channel,
Mm-hmm.
History Unearthed, or something along those lines.
I like the name History Unearthed.
Yeah.
So
So
we're going to talk about space history.
yeah. Like
Earth is in space.
Okay. Yeah. So what is the idea for History Unearthed, Matt?
Does it involve space history? This is new to me.
Sure. Space history to the degree that Earth is in space. No, I mean, I was thinking there's a couple ways to do this channel, but I think
None of you steal this idea. I'm watching you.
well, I mean, we're already in the progress of planning this. I think we'll have it out sometime soon. One idea for the channel, and of course we'd like to hear what you guys think, is basically taking really interesting but not well-known stories from history and kind of digging them up and presenting them in kind of a fun way, sort of in the same style that we do China Uncensored. Possibly, you know, some things you can show photos and stuff, but a lot of things you don't have any kind of thing like that. So maybe
Historical reenactment.
well,
Oh, that's an idea.
well,
I was thinking I could do some drawings.
Yes.
I was actually thinking animation. I remember like 5 years ago, you did that episode on Journey to the East.
Oh, yeah.
It was like one episode, like part one of one. It ended up being, but like that style of
Journey to the West.
what did I say?
To the East.
Oh, yeah.
Journey to the West. Yes. No, Journey
Well,
to
because
the
Journey to the East was a documentary show about China that I was involved in.
Right. Yeah, no, it's embarrassing to get those two mixed up. But at any rate, so the idea would be you have these really cool stories that like people don't really know, especially looking at things that like this is a moment that changed history forever. And like what's behind that? And then we can animate it, do something kind of fun like that.
I mean, I think it's also interesting that like a lot of like our understandings of what happened in history are change, right? Or
Sure.
um
Well, I mean, there's facts and then there's interpretations.
This is sounding
And
like
then
the
there's-
1619 thing and the 1776 Commission.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a rabbit hole I want to get down on this episode.
Right. But I mean, I'm not interested in historical narratives so much as like judging what people did based on.
Well, so what's an
Modern
example of
ideas.
like a story, like something that, like you say, is like changed history or might not be so well known? I think it's fascinating that there were places in ancient Rome that had flushing toilets, but toilet paper wasn't invented until several hundred years later in China.
Well, do you know how they used to handle the Roman bathrooms? They had these like sponges on a stick that were communal.
Oh God!
Yeah, no. So you'd have these rooms with open, like with benches, and you'd have it was less like flushing and more like you'd have running water constantly underneath.
I've been in
And-
bathrooms like that in China.
Yeah. And then it'd be like a communal stick, maybe more than one. And then you just kind of use that.
Calling them flushing toilets is a little
Oh,
Yeah. But
then
they were,
I was told wrong then.
well, I mean, yes.
there was this really great movie, and I forget the name of it.
Is this the Japanese Roman bathhouse movie?
Yeah, it's about it's a Japanese movie, and it's set in ancient Rome. And there's a Roman bathhouse engineer who is played by a Japanese man, obviously, gets sucked into a wormhole and ends up in a modern day Japanese bathhouse and uses that as inspiration to build bathhouse technology in ancient Rome. So everything he does is like he sees in Japan, like, bubble bath. It's like, jets are spraying bubbles. And so using ancient Roman technology, he just has a bunch of slaves blowing into tubes. So most of the things he makes are slave power because that's what he has. It's a really funny movie.
Okay. Probably
that
not
sounds
historically
horrible.
accurate is my guess here with the time travel.
Probably
we
not.
don't know how much time travel took place because
That's
just
true.
because there's no evidence of it doesn't mean.
What if we live in the timeline that people from the future traveled back and tried to fix? So,
Well, they didn't do a very good job, did they?
well, it could be worse. That's what we don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, no, that's a good point. Like I do like to kind of look at the world as like it could be worse, right?
Mhm. That reminds me of an ancient Chinese saying, Taiwan Shima. You know the one.
Yeah. That's more kind of like,
It's kind of, it could always be. Like, you don't know if it's a good thing. You don't know if it's a bad thing. Try not to, like, get too happy.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Anyways, look that saying up. Matt, carry on.
Oh, well, so moments in history that change things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for example,
Like in 300 where he's throwing the spear at Xerxes and he misses. But what if he hit him?
yeah, or like okay, like what if Hitler got into art school?
Okay.
Like
yeah.
that kind of thing.
But
I'm-
that's not
Right, but
that's like speculation about how like the timeline could change.
Yeah.
right. No,
alternate
but and
history.
I think that's actually not a good example because you
Okay,
had
so why did you give that as an example, Matt?
because
If
you put me on the spot, but go on.
What if in history you hadn't said that? Think of how the future might be changed.
All right, like what if the U.S. hadn't made the Louisiana Purchase?
That's well,
Right. So then you'd have like the French on our doorstep constantly instead of
We are living in a better timeline.
Yeah. Now all we have to deal with is Montreal and their poutine.
I was gonna say we do our like New York directly borders Quebec.
That's true. I mean, look, for all the problems that Quebec causes the rest of the Canadians, like they're not really a big problem to the U.S.
Yeah.
And the people there are still pretty nice.
So what I'm getting is we're still flushing out this idea,
We're still flushing it out.
especially if we're talking about ancient Roman bathhouse.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Did we have more China news we wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I feel like
I'm-
this got a little
I'm
off
so
track.
sorry. This is what happens. Oh, God, I have the Zardoz photo on my phone. That's not something you want to greet you when you turn on your phone.
I don't know, Chris. I've been to your house, and on the ceiling over your bed is a giant poster from that movie.
That's not true. What is true is when I used to go to the Sunset Boulevard screenings of The Room, I got a big The Room poster, which is just, Tommy Wiseau's face. And this was when I was in college. And at one point I did like put that on my ceiling
Why?
because I thought it'd be a conversation starter. But then one night it fell on me while I was sleeping.
Oh, no.
And that is not something you want to wake up to.
Attacked by Tommy Wiseau.
Yeah, that's just one of my many Room stories. Should we? I'm still in contact with Greg Sestero. Should we invite him on the show sometime or a show?
Sure.
We'll just have to make a show specifically so you can talk about The Room.
I don't think that has legs.
Well, I don't know because they made an entire movie about the making of The Room called The Disaster Artist.
Well, it was based on Greg Sestero's book, right?
Yeah.
So
Which
Yeah.
he says is like only a tiny fraction of the stories he has about Tommy Wiseau.
Yeah. Well,
so we should just get him on the show, even if
Tommy ununderstood.
Yeah. Well, but I think that the interesting part here is that this incredibly obscure and, let's be honest, worst possible movie ever.
that could be
Was-
worse.
Well, no, but like you, Chris, went to like what, a dozen initial screenings in Los Angeles?
Someday I'll tell my story of the room, but not today.
We're really off track now.
We are extremely off track.
This is.
But
what,
I do
what podcast
want
is this?
to ask, like, did you have a girlfriend at the point where you had the room poster above your bed?
Trying to think.
Not
room-
after he put it up.
The room occupied a big part of my life. It would seem unlikely.
Yes, that would be my guess as well.
We'll go with that. Hey, so the WHO.
Oh, God.
Is anyone still watching? I can see why the monopoly socialism did better. Hey, the WHO finally got their investigation into the origin of the
Wait, hold on.
coronavirus.
We can't say that.
Oh, that's right. YouTube will suppress us.
There is
How do we talk about this?
International.
The Backstreet Boys went
Okay.
to China. I think we can say China.
China, okay.
So the Backstreet Boys, you know who I'm talking about, went to China after being denied for a year to go to, can we say the city in China? Bat Town.
Wait, I don't
Or is
think
that
we can
offensive?
say. I don't think no.
That's,
I think that actually that like
The Backstreet Boys wanted to go check out a Batman reunion tour
okay.
in China. Is this
at
this
the Bat Town Institute of Musicology.
Oh God! You know what?
You
I
know
don't
what?
care if they suppress it. The WHO finally got to
No. Like I think you're onto something with the Backstreet Boys. I like this.
the Backstreet Boys. Go
Okay,
to China.
so they went to China, and even though the Chinese government had, they were there to look into this reunion tour.
Mm.
The Chinese government said that they weren't allowed to see the information from the previous tour.
This
Right,
is
but
what
they wanted to see-
self-censorship results in.
No, so the Backstreet Boys wanted to see the audience size and demographics from the initial tour in
okay,
2020.
the data of the
Right, exactly.
Uh-huh.
And so in order to do that, they had to do an investigation where they collect the data and ask questions. But the Chinese government wanted to provide the audience demographic data that was supposed to be like, tell them, here's the result of your investigation. And you don't have to actually ask any questions. Here's what your result will be. And the Backstreet Boys were unhappy, feeling that this was an unsatisfying way to understand the demographic data.
The Backstreet Boys did learn some things, though, even from the Chinese state-run boy band that was, telling them the data instead of letting them look at the data. Like the fact that there were more people who in the audience than had been previously found, and that people
concert
went to the
began
concert
earlier?
way earlier, like months earlier than
Okay.
December of 2019.
So when China is saying that the Backstreet Boys tour actually began outside of China, this no longer
Through
holds up.
frozen foods, that we can say frozen foods, right? Sure.
For now.
Okay.
Frozen
that
ticket stubs.
yeah, like they were like, actually the Backstreet Boys were now the Backstreet Boys. Okay, the Backstreet Boys were in Italy. This is confusing because the Backstreet Boys have become
it's-
something else.
been
I
using
know
them
the
to-
story, and I've barely been able to follow
Okay,
you guys.
so this was in Italy before it came.
YouTube is making us do this. This
And
hurts
then
everyone.
we were just trying to find a fun way to do it. We didn't have to do it this way.
We didn't
but
have
we
to
just,
do it. But we
just
kind of
wanted
have to if we
see
don't
like
want
how
to.
it goes. So the Chinese Communist Party was like, well, no, the tour started in Italy
Mhm, or in the U.S.
or in India,
Or in India.
and then actually it seems like it started in China because they were like the tour was in Italy in November, so that proves that it didn't start in China.
Look, the main point is Backstreet's back. All right. Here's how you protect yourself, because the second wave of the Backstreet is much more virulent and deadly than the first Backstreet Boys reunion tour.
That's not true, actually.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
The Backstreet Boys.
But now that they've teamed up with boy bands from other countries. There's new strains of this music,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Such
So-
as the Backstreet Boys, New Kids on the Block, Union Tour, right? What do you call it?
They actually did have a Backstreet Boys New Kids on the Block reunion tour.
Wait, is this
Yeah.
a metaphor or real?
No, it's real. A few years
Really?
ago, there was a tour called NKOTBSB, which was the New Kids on the Block and the Backstreet Boys
Wow.
together.
I mean, I got like that's actually kind of cool.
I mean,
I mean,
it
not
was
for me. Like
it was
I
a
don't care, but
brilliant idea actually, because marketing wise and in terms of getting people to the concerts, right? Like demographically, that was like a pretty sweet spot for them to hit. But anyway, the point is, back to China
Mm-hmm.
and the very special Backstreet Boys reunion tour that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And the audience.
The audience,
Data.
went to the concert in like September, starting in September in different parts of Hubei province, which is where the city where everybody thought the tour started
Uh-huh.
is located.
So
you
the
know-
data doesn't match up. The data is not
And it
in
doesn't.
sync.
Yes, the data is not in sync with the claims of the Chinese Communist Party. That's pretty good.
Well,
And also a lot of the audience members didn't go shopping at a particular market
for
that
CDs.
the
yes, the Wuhan the can I say
No,
Wuhan?
no, you can't.
The CD market, the wet CD market, where you can get all kinds of exotic CDs. There's a reason this is China Unscripted. It's very, very, very unscripted.
we obviously didn't come up with an analogy for this before we started.
No, we didn't. Points off for us.
We had to remain true to the spirit of the show.
That's true.
But anyway, I think people got the point, right?
Let us know in the comments. Did you get the point? Tell us what the story is. Anyways, yeah, this the Backstreet saga is far from over.
No, yeah. We'll have to wait to see what happens next.
Mhm.
Fortunately, pharmaceutical companies have created earplugs that help prevent the spread of this music.
I hear you should put 2 earplugs in each
right,
ear.
but like 3 weeks apart.
Oh,
What?
I think you guys are saying earplugs are two different things.
Is that a risk with like confusing metaphors? What are your earplugs?
No, I'm not going to tell you what they are because that would get us demonetized.
Well,
Chris.
they're earplugs that you have to get 3 weeks apart.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was talking about the earplugs that you need to.
Put on your face.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Well, I think we might have hit a new low on the show.
I enjoyed the Backstreet Boys, analogy.
Well, so we can either wrap it up here, try to climb our
ourselves
way
out
out,
of the
or
hole.
potentially dig ourselves into a deeper hole.
My vote is for dig deeper until we get to China.
And history unearthed.
Yep, that would be your vote, wouldn't it?
All right, well, let's try to dig ourselves out of this hole.
I mean, I think that, this is a very viable strategy. We should just continue to use analogies for all the China news we're talking about. Then YouTube can never demonetize us,
Yes.
but also no one will watch us because they'll have no idea what's going on. So there's pros and cons.
Definitely. Well, we could send out like a secret decoder ring to our audience. So like they know what we're talking about. They have the decoder ring.
Oh, okay. Like Backstreet Boys equals.
That, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
As long as we ourselves are straight on what we're talking about.
right, which was definitely not the case.
Definitely not the case. Okay, so we'll dig ourselves out of this hole by digging straight to India.
Uh-huh.
Good transition. So, as you may remember, there were deadly border clashes last year. China has actually come out and admitted that some Chinese soldiers had died. They put the number at 4, which to me means a lot
Like
more
40?
than died.
Yeah.
40 Indian soldiers died, correct? 20.
20.
But anyways, they've admitted that 4 have died. And this is interesting because this is coming as China and India, they agreed to withdraw troops from some areas of the disputed border And it seems, based on satellite images, that China actually has followed through on a promise.
Except for the soldiers that they left behind disguised as bushes.
Is that true?
No. I mean, but it was a joke about how you couldn't tell from satellite images, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, satellite images don't have great resolution, right? I mean, you can't, like, 1 meter is a square meter is like a pixel. So there's only so much you can actually tell, right? Like, you can't really see individual people.
Yeah, I mean, it's a risk with the Indian and Chinese soldiers, troops, both sides agreeing to leave, right? Because this is kind of what happened in the South China Sea with the Philippines in 2012,
Where
they both said they were going to leave, the Philippines left, and then the Chinese did not.
just did not.
Right, but you just got to do it like bit by bit. Like there was like during the Cold War, like the U.S. and the Soviets had sent tanks like up to Checkpoint Charlie, and then like we're about to go to nuclear war with the Soviet Union, in like Berlin, right? And then Kennedy and Khrushchev, I think, like had a phone call, and they talked it out and like backed up. Like the Soviet tanks backed up like a couple inches, and the U.S. tank like a couple inches, and like gradually they kind of pulled back from the brink of global Armageddon, which was nice.
Oh, is this going to be a story for History on Earth? I think this has more potential than...
I feel like that's actually an interesting story.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's a trust but verify story, not a trust and assume the communists are going to keep their promise type story.
Well, I mean, so there's one good reason that the Chinese Communist Party does have in terms of the Indian border issue that they didn't have in the South China Sea issue to actually withdraw, which is that unlike the South China Sea, which was a kind of a diplomatic victory for the Chinese Communist Party, this like Indian border clashes over the last year have been a pretty big disaster for them. I mean, India obviously previously was allies with like the US and stuff like that, but kind of had been like more neutral on a lot of the issues.
They were kind of playing both sides.
I would say India, since they left the British rule in 48, they have been largely pulling away from the West and from the US. I would say our alliance with India was not particularly strong for like 6 decades.
But they had a worse relationship with China by far.
That's true.
But, also there's the whole issue of Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
So China and Pakistan are allied, so that makes the whole like China-India thing more complicated as well. But what happened after the border clashes started happening last year? India banned all these Chinese apps.
Mhm.
They started boycotts of Chinese goods, which was actually a pretty large market because I think for Chinese goods in India. So that was like a big blow. They joined the Quad,
Yeah.
right, with the US and Australia and Japan, and started talking a lot more about security in the Indo-Pacific region, and this like messes up a lot of China's Belt and Road plans. So there were a lot of things with the India-China border conflict that China kind of stepped in it in a lot of ways by having some of these border clashes and then kind of continuing to have this be such a long-running thing because they've had border clashes before and then they'd kind of just back down. That both sides would back down.
More or less, but China inching forward.
Yes, so it may be strategically advantageous for them to actually leave, at least temporarily.
Except for those soldiers disguised as bushes.
Yes, like Wile E. Coyote stuff.
Well, you know what happens to Wile E. Coyote. Well, the same thing that happens at the end of every episode.
He falls off a cliff?
Yeah, or he fails to succeed, right? He gets blown up, or he falls off a cliff, or he, runs into a painting of a tunnel, or like whatever it ends up being. But he never, ever catches the Roadrunner.
I thought we were going to stop using analogies.
You were going to stop using analogies.
Okay.
But I'm going to keep digging.
All right. Well, speaking of putting your foot in your mouth, Biden got some flack this week, or last week as of when this comes out, for a CNN town hall. That was a good transition, wasn't it?
That was excellent, Chris. They can still hear you when you're whispering.
But I'm whispering into a microphone. Surely they can't hear that. How about we do ASMR?
No.
ASMR unscripted. I don't know. Yes.
Matt, why do you have the worst ASMR?
Oh, I thought that was as good as any ASMR I've heard.
It was no worse.
No.
So at any rate,
so Biden in town hall basically was talking about his phone call with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Took 2 hours.
I don't think he said it like that. He was like, yeah, for 2 hours.
That was me.
Yeah.
That was my editorializing, I suppose. But yeah, he said, well, a lot of conservative media were kind of taking something he said out of context, like that he was dismissing the genocide of Uyghurs as just China's cultural norms.
Yes.
Which is not what happened. What he said was not good. The cultural norms he was talking about was the U.S. That the U.S. President, kind of has to talk about human rights.
Well, I mean, it's a little. He got kind of rambly and
as
confused.
Biden does.
well, you're saying Joe Biden got rambly.
Yeah, right. So he made a comment about how we as America, we have to stand up for human rights. We have to speak out about human rights. And then he talked about how he said the stuff to Xi Jinping, and he talked about Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and then how as I have to we have to talk about this stuff, and I said it to his face, and then he was like, he gets it, like Xi Jinping gets it that they're different. Countries have different cultural, they have different norms, culturally speaking, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So then it kind of implies that Xi Jinping understands that Biden is going to bring these things up as the president of the United States, who has to stand up for human rights. Well, the part about don't take it seriously is kind of it.
Did he mean that? Was he just not? Was he fumbling? With his
did
words?
he just not say? Did he just mean that Xi Jinping understands that Biden's going to bring it up because this we are America, or did he mean that? I don't think he would have said this out loud if he meant this, that Xi Jinping knows to not take it seriously because we just have to say it because we're America, right?
I mean, I think that the best strategy for Biden moving forward is to simply not go in any more town halls.
He did say at the end of this pretty long question about China that he shouldn't try to talk China policy on TV in 10 minutes.
That is a fair point. But so we did a full episode about that town hall on a Saturday's episode of America Uncovered. And I think the point we made that I think is important is that it's kind of silly to judge a president's China policy based on some off-the-cuff comment that could be very, stupid. And we should actually look at what the policy decisions are. This was something the media did all the time with Trump. As we point out, Trump says, "Oh, I love Xi Jinping," or something like that. And
obviously, he just loves dictators.
Yeah. Versus looking at okay, this was the specific policy decision he made to sanction Carrie Lam in Hong Kong.
But Carrie Lam's no Xi Jinping.
It's just
right. I mean, she's Piglet to his poo.
I mean, I think that you do have to it's not that you shouldn't report on what the president is saying about China, right? But that isn't the entirety of what they do is much more important in the end. Yeah.
And just also this kind of culture we have where communication isn't an easy thing for anyone. It's we vibrate meat in our throats, and that's okay. How we talk. And so if somebody it slips up and says something a little bad off the cuff, it's doomsday for them.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the media environment. But I think the other thing with this particular issue is that it was interesting to look at how conservative versus liberal media reported on this Biden gaffe or whatever. So conservative media was Biden gets into hot water for how he talked about China's human rights, or the more extreme ones were he's defending China's genocide, he's excusing genocide or whatever. But and then you see liberal media that were he in another part where Anderson Cooper basically, to his credit, asked a follow-up question that was like, so is this just about speaking out about human rights, or are there going to be repercussions for China for violating human rights? And then Biden said there will be repercussions for China, and Xi Jinping understands that. But he didn't say, like, the U.S. is going to implement
this specific thing. We are going to send a diplomat to
Taiwan.
Taiwan.
He didn't even say that, like, there would be repercussions from the U.S. He could just mean in general that, like, because later he said something in that answer about how, like, if they want to be, like, a world power, it's going to be hard for them if they keep on violating human rights. So that didn't make it sound like the U.S. is going to implement any type of repercussions for the Chinese Communist Party. But, like, a lot of liberal media stories were kind of like, Biden says there will be repercussions, so like a completely opposite framing of the same thing based on picking out which part of his speech you wanted to actually spin.
And that says, and we began the episode talking about how headlines are not a good way to get your news, and we kind of ended on the idea of the media landscape being
Speaking
trash.
of, what's going to be the title of this episode so we get people to watch?
Oh, right. We need to find something really clickbaity and grabby. Maybe something about Goyles.
About what?
The Goyles.
How about something about Taiwan launching missiles directly at China?
And the Backstreet Boys?
And the
Brink
Backstreet Boys.
of war.
Brink of
with
war.
the Backstreet Boys.
Yeah. Well, brink of war, because we talked about the Checkpoint Charlie thing.
That's right.
So I would say, brink of war, and then also like slash, like, unrelated. Taiwan launches missile system. Right?
Taiwan missiles aimed.
The point is to be technically accurate while being completely misleading enough so
lead
that
the person
clicks.
to a conclusion that you want to make them to click.
Right, and as long as you can generate some kind of fear,
yes,
then that's the most likely to get them to click.
So all of you watching up to the end, it's obviously not because of our great content. It's we duped you.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelly Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
See you next time. We have a clickbaity headline.